Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Distinct Authors Talking Publishing. Today we are joined by our special guest, Beth D Carter, author of The Scarlet Dove, available now from Beach Walk Press, wherever ebooks are sold. Thank you so much for joining us, Beth.
How do you find time to write? Wow.
Here and there. I was able to, I have on my days off, I sit down on my last day off, which was Tuesday. I actually managed to write about 3,000 words, so that was really good. But
Oh, wow.
just bits and pieces, like I'll sit down, I'll dream about it, or I'll think about it, I'll take a walk and I'll think about it, and then I can sit down and just type it out real quick.
Oh,
A little bit
wow.
here, a little bit.
Wow, that's fantastic. I wish I was that organized. I shouldn't say that because I think I got yesterday. I think I got all together with everything that I was doing. I think I got about 5,000 words down. Unfortunately, it wasn't all one book. I was working on 3 different books, so and blog posts and a script for an upcoming podcast. And I got words down, but it's not quite the same.
But still, 5,000 is great, no matter what project you're working on or what you're doing. Because I have my own blog, so I constantly got to get that done. And it can be time management is essential in this business.
It really is. It really is. So now I am in the process of reading your book, and I do have a video review that I am planning on doing as well, which I have to finish the book. I'm not still working full time. So it's really finding a balance. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this particular novel, Scarlet Dove? What, how you came up with the idea, what drew you to the characters a little, and just kind of give us a little bit more insight into this particular book.
Well, for the Scarlet Dove, it's a historical, and I've been in the medical field for probably about 30 years now. So, and I'm very much, that was more of my background. Like when I started writing, I thought this character through, and I actually thought of her first. I saw this kind of redhead in the harsh Arizona, backcountry. And I thought, oh, this girl that I'm seeing is really, she's going to be important. So I started thinking about her story, and I started coming up with the idea of she was a mail order bride, but what happens when it's a con? And so this Eliza in my story was in the East. Women back in the 1800s didn't have a lot of freedoms. They didn't have any freedoms that we have now. So I thought, well, what do women do? Back then, they either became wives, they became spinsters, or they went in some kind of profession like either, nuns or a teacher, or, the bad kind, which is sometimes they have to make ends meet, and that led to prostitution. I was just thinking about this character. She was on my mind for a long time. And then I like history, started reading about the first female doctor in the United States who became a doctor simply because her best friend died from a male doctor not wanting to, basically, they didn't understand women back then. They thought, oh, if you have a menstrual period, that's, punishment from God. That was kind of like their mentality. She ended up dying, and her friend goes, I'm going to change this, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. So she's like, I'm going to go to medical school. The only reason why she got into medical school was because the all-male body, she applied to every medical school, and the entire male campus, they gave it a vote, and they voted her in on a joke. So, and that's the only reason why she got into medical school. And then she ended up becoming a doctor, and she transformed the state of how women were perceived in medicine. So it was a really fascinating story. So that was kind of like my jump off into this character that I had envisioned for so long.
Wow. And that's one of the time periods that I'm a history buff. I love history, so it's such a unique perspective, because I think we take for granted so much of the luxury that we have now. If we want to become a lawyer or a doctor or an astronaut or what have you, we can do that. I mean, there's not as many barriers, and I really and I'm loving Liz, by the way, as she is such a unique character in that she's, and this is my perception, but it's just she's strong-willed. She has a mind of her own. She's opinionated. She's definitely not, she's not a pushover, but she is definitely aware of the world that she lives in. So she's not a cookie cutter historical heroine, and I've read a few books that the heroines, you can pretty much just take them out of one book and put them into the next one because they're so predictable. And she's not. I'm finding her to be just so refreshing myself. And I said, like I said, I'm really enjoying the book. So now the 2 heroes that you have in this book, they're very unique. They're very similar, but there is some distinct differences. How did you come up with these two particular characters?
They kind of evolved. When I started writing the story, I wasn't going to have two heroes of the story. I was just going to have one hero. But when you start writing a character that, especially for Blue, that, he's the Native American of the story. When I started writing him, he just kind of like left off the page of saying, wait a minute, what am I, chopped liver? So the more he started evolving and the more dynamic I put between him and his cousin, how different they are, but how alike they are, that I was like, okay, this whole story, the dynamic of the story is going to change. And then I didn't want her to fall into, Liza is very unique, and I think she's very vulnerable at the same time that she is very strong. She is a product, she's almost a product of her time, where she has this mentality of, I've got to do something, I'm going to become a wife, rather than any of these other choices, these bad choices. But at the same time, she's also finding her place in this I'm fish out of water story, kind of. So I think when she meets these two guys, I didn't want it to be a damsel in distress. Like, I don't like writing damsels in distress. I like writing damsels who are in distress but who can save themselves. And sometimes that's thinking kind of outside the box.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and I think that we need, as authors, we really need to be aware of that. We can't fall into that trap of having the damsel in distress who needs to be saved because she can't do it herself when she's perfectly capable of doing herself, and falling into that kind of a cliche. It really does detract, I think, from the novel, from the story. And there's books that I have recently read that were like that, where I started reading it and the heroine is so, for want of a better word, very cliche. She is the epitome of a damsel in distress. Oh my goodness gracious, I've broken a nail, you need to save me, you need to rescue me kind of person. And so reading this one with a character who is, like I said, she is her own person. She's, she may be a damsel in distress, but she can give as good as she's getting, while she, even though she knows that the environment that she's in makes it uncomfortable, or makes her really aware of perhaps the limitations that she does have. How long did it take you to write The Scarlet Dove?
Well, The Scarlet Dove, I would say a couple of months to took from when I first sat down and writing it, because writers have to be very careful to let their characters grow. So writing, I say this all the time. If you ever read any of my blogs, I'll always say writing is very organic. It's constantly evolving and it's constantly growing. And you as a writer have to evolve and adapt. And one of the things you got to do is let your characters really evolve with you. And sometimes if you have outlines, like a lot of writers, they outline and they have to put everything that's going to be in like chapter 1 or chapter 2, and they have to be this very structured writing. I'm not like that. I'm what we writers call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I do have an idea of where my characters are going, but I let my characters really drive their own narrative. So as with Liza, when she was evolving as a writer, and then I started getting into this whole background of how does she know how to dig a bullet out of a shoulder? How does she know this? And when I went back and I started researching about germ theory, when did we start realizing that there was germs in a wound? The reading, and it was very fascinating. So my character at the very end, I'm not going to give anything away, but I had to write her in a way, when the bad guy comes to get her, I had to write her as very organic and as natural to her, that she's not going to whip out a gun and just shoot the bad guy. That's not who she is. So I had to figure out, how do I take this character's backgrounds and get her out of the situation? And I think I did a really good job with that. So when you finally get to the ending, you're like, oh, that was clever. Hopefully that you think that. But so I'm constantly letting my characters kind of drive me. So it took a couple of months, just because Liza started out one way and she ended up something different.
I can understand that. And I'm a pantser too. I have tried plotting and it never works for me. It's actually quite funny, because I will sit down and I will plot, and I don't know if you've ever done this, where you kind of plotted out the whole book, and then you get 20 pages in, 30 pages in, and you realize, oh wait, my plot is over there in in the next county, and the story is over here, and it just kind of, they're very organic. So what do you have on your plate now? Do you have another book coming up? Are you working on another one? what's new and exciting in your plans for your future writing?
Well, right now I'm very excited because my publisher, Evernight, picked up one of my books called Dreamland. It is actually a time travel set in 1927. And what's unique about it is that it's from the hero's point of view. The hero goes into a coma, and when he wakes up, he's in 1927. So he's this rock star, and he has to navigate this world that he has no knowledge about. And I had to do a lot of research in the 20s. The lingo was so completely different than it is now, and I play a lot. I try to put a lot of humor into my stories. I love putting the sarcastic one-liners. Like Buffy was Buffy was on the air. That was one of my favorite shows, just because all the one-liners that Joss Whedon was able to kick out, and I love putting those kind of that dry humor into my stories. You'll see it a lot in the Scarlet Dove, especially between Blue and Apollo. You get to see a lot of this little wordplay and funny kind of moments between them. So in this story, I have that coming out. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite stories I've ever written, was Dreamland, and so that's coming out. I'm working on a kind of a sequel to one of my other books. It's not a direct sequel, but it's set in the same world, where it's about humans that are these companions to supernatural creatures. And so it's set like in a hospital, because these supernatural creatures are like, well, we have to, if we have all these companions, eventually the companions are going to get old and die. So we need a hospital to treat them. So it's kind of like that kind of setting. And then there's a mystery surrounding that. So that's what I'm working on now.
Oh, wonderful. Now, you do an awful lot of research. So and you write in a variety of genres, and you write in a variety of styles with everything that you've got on the go. What is the one aspect across the board in your writing that you carry forward regardless of the content of your writing, whether you're writing historical or sci-fi or what have you, or your paranormals? What's the one thing that stays true throughout?
I would probably say my voice, my characters' voices. Like I said, I like to put a lot of this dry humor into it. So you'll always have that one character in my books that's always the sidekick, that's usually sarcastic or very witty. You'll always have that one character. So almost like the comic relief of the story. But I think a lot of with my heroines, I think that I have a very clear voice with them. I don't like to write cookie cutter women. I don't like I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a this. I like to write characters who could be you and me. They are just everyday women, and they're usually thrust into some kind of situation that is beyond their control. How do they get out of it? So I like to write about the ordinary girl, the ordinary woman. And it's so funny because now that I'm in my 40s, my characters, I have actually, my female characters have changed. When I was, 10 years ago when I started writing, my characters were in their 20s. But now that I'm in my 40s, I'm like, I go back and I read stories where, like, some of my favorite authors, I read them and their characters are in their 20s, and I have I cannot relate to them at all. I think it's just because I've just matured a lot. So I'm like, my characters are usually in their 30s, late 30s, early 40s, around my same age bracket as I am, because I can relate to them better. They have better stories, I think.
I would agree. This is one of those things with historicals that I find to be a bit of a challenge. I like accuracy when I'm reading historical. I don't want to be reading historical romance or anything with history in it. And, the characters are doing it's set in the 17th century and the characters are doing something that is the 19th century or vice versa, or, there's that huge gap. So how do you overcome that hurdle where, you want to maintain historical accuracy without it affecting your writing, while keeping in mind that your audience is 21st century, very politically correct, very aware of the differences in all of the different peoples that we interact with?
That is a very good question. I've written several historicals. One of my historicals, The Songbird, was set in 1840s in San Francisco. I think one of the easiest or hardest ways to do it, easy and hard, is the words that their characters use. There are certain phrases that are modern day catchphrases, and You read and you're like, oh, a person in 1840 would never say that. That's like I was saying in my story when I'm written in 1927, my time travel. The lingo has to, I had to use 1920s lingo. So you have to go back and you just have to be very careful about the voice of your character and what they're saying. And I think that's one of the most, you can write facts all you want, like Barbary Coast or whatever to heart's desire, but it's what your characters are saying, and I think that's one of the most difficult challenges. But I kind of relish that.
Which is it is a challenge. I was recently reading a blog post, and the author of this blog post, and I'll actually try and find it and put it into the description box below, but they were talking about how they were writing and they were dealing with a specific time period where they were dealing with issues with slavery and how that is perceived, and the environment that the people in that time period lived in. Have you ever struggled with that, where you're trying to keep it modern, but at the same time you're not trying to romanticize certain time periods or events, but you want to keep that authenticity, that idea of, this is the 1840s. It's not, this is plantations and slavery and that sort of thing. It's not a romantic, it's not one of those rose-colored glass situations, but at the same time you want to make it so that your readers aren't put off by that writing. So how do you kind of bridge that?
Well, actually, I bridge it by putting a disclaimer that these are not my opinion, but I'm just writing these words for historical accuracy. I was actually in the Songbird. I think it was in the Scarlet Dove too, because in the Scarlet Dove, I do refer to Blue. There's a lot of people that call him an Injun because he's a Native American. They would never have used the word Native American in the 1800s. That is just, they wouldn't. It would have been a derogatory term. They were very, so that's very much in my mind when I write these. When I wrote the Songbird, it's set in San Francisco, so you can imagine how bad that the Asian Americans were treated when they came over. I mean, it was horrible. If you do any kind of research about it, it was just awful. And so I try very hard I might use some slurs, but I'm aware, I put in my author note, this, in this time period, these are the words that they were used. And my editors, when I go through with my editors, I actually make a note of that, and she's like, yeah, put that in there, put that in there, make sure that they know.
Well, that makes sense. That's a good way to handle it, I think, because there are so many people out there who maybe don't see, they don't see that we're telling a story, we're showing a story, we're not living it. That's not our personal thought process. So how to get a hold of your books or get in touch with you, how can they do that? Do you have a website? And I know you've got a blog, but do you have a website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? Any of that?
I don't have a website. It was too hard for me to maintain. So I just mainly have a blog site. I'm on Google Blogger, and you can just type it's Written Butterfly, Written Butterfly, or Beth D Carter Written Butterfly. I'm on Facebook, Beth D Carter Author. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram. On my Facebook, if you find me, Beth D Carter, then you have links to my blog and my podcast that I have on my Facebook page. But that's where I'm at mostly.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
It's still kind of in infancy. I'm still learning. I'm trying to do it every Friday. This whole pandemic that we're having has really kind of messed up a lot of like I was supposed to interview somebody this morning, and she was like, oh, I have to homeschool my kids, so I can't do an interview with you. So I'm like, okay, I understand. So I think this whole pandemic has kind of eaten into it a little bit, but I'm still learning the ropes. I'm still learning what to write. My biggest fear when I do them is saying or or well, kind of like not knowing what to say. So you're filling in the silence with these little goofs that you sometimes say when you're talking. That's my whole goal.
Do you work from a script when you are doing a podcast? if you're not doing an interview? Do you work from a script, or is it just a very organic presentation?
So my very first one, my very dear friend C.R. Moss let me interview her. She lives here in Vegas as well. And I called her and she let me interview her. And we actually worked off the script because I think that she's very structured. So she kind of needed that script. And that was my first time. So I didn't know what the heck I was saying anyway. So I think we worked off a script. And then the second podcast I did was myself because I was like, I don't know what to do. So let me just interview myself. And then the third one, I read off some questions. Like I had somebody answer questions and then I just read their answers. So far I've been working off. Yours is the very first non-script I've done. So I'm kind of like very nervous right now because I don't know what to say or what you're going to ask. So it's a little bit of a challenge, I think.
Yeah, and I apologize for the challenge. I mean, I'm myself, when I'm doing interviews, I've tried to do the structured where, I have sent a page of questions and said, okay, well, here's 20 questions, pick 10, and well, those are the 10 that we're going to talk about. And I've tried that, and then I've kind of tried the more organic way, which is the way that we're doing it today. And I lean more towards the organic. You'd never know that you were nervous, by the way. You're doing fantastic. I can't even tell that you're nervous. So you're doing fantastic.
Good,
all good. And it's one of those things that I love talking to other authors. I love talking to readers and people and really kind of trying to bridge that gap. Now, do you read? Are you one of the authors that reads just as voraciously as you write, or are you one of them that you write but you're not really a big reader?
Oh, I love reading. I think any good author or any good writer has to read. You have to read. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to read. My days are very busy. I work full time as a pharmacy tech, I told you, and then I have a 13-year-old that I have to. He's getting ready to go into high school, so our lives are gonna change dramatically. And then when I'm not doing that, I still have to maintain. I'm married. I have a family. I have to, make dinner or, wash dishes and clean. You do your normal day stuff. So the only time I get to read is right before bed. When I'm in my bed, I'm getting ready for bed. I lay down. I grab my e-reader. I love books. Everybody's like, oh, I hate e-readers because they're not books. But, unfortunately, the times that we live in, especially with paper, you got to save the trees. I think e-readers are going to be more of the future rather than paperbacks. But I do have a whole paperback collection that I started reading. I started reading my mom's Harlequins when I was like 11 or 12, which is nuts if you think about it now. I can't imagine my 13-year-old going and reading a romance novel. I'm just like, no, that's not appropriate. But my mom was like one of those, if you have any questions, ask me kind of person. So I started reading Harlequin novels at like 11 or 12, which got me hooked on, this is what I want to do for my life. I want to be a writer. And I started writing my own stories. I think I wrote my first novel when I was like 14, and it was all longhand in a spiral notebook. And it was just so funny now that I think about that. I wish I knew where that book was, but I'm sure I threw it away. So the only time I ever get to read, to answer your question, is right before bedtime. And so, it's not often, but I do read as much as I possibly can.
Do you have a writing space that's a space that you have designated for your writing space that's kind of got the invisible barriers up that, don't disturb, if I'm here, don't disturb me, leave me alone kind of idea? Do you have that, or do you just write wherever, sit on the couch and write or anything like that?
I don't have any designated space. Because everything is so busy in my life that if I can find 5 minutes to, bring up my laptop, I can write anywhere. I can also tune a lot of things out. Like somebody can be talking to me and I can go, and not hear a word they're saying. But in my mind, I'm writing my story. Kids are like that, the kids are just like blah, 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 blah. And I'm just like, and I have no idea what my son just told me. I do like writing at coffee shops. So if I on my days off, if I drop my son off to school, I might pop into a Starbucks or something and I can sit there and I can write for an hour or so. I do like doing that, and that gives me a lot of privacy because nobody's disturbing you there. But other than that, that's probably I don't have a desk or anything.
Okay. So do you now I know you're a pantser, so when you are looking at doing your characters and those sorts of things, do you actually do character interviews, that sort of thing, to really kind of get into the characters' heads?
Nope. I can think of a character, for instance, Liza. She came to me, and I saw this redhead with lots of freckles, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting, character. What can I do with her? And I'm writing her, and then as I'm writing the story, that's when the characters' backgrounds really come alive for me, and then I can go back and I'll edit what I need to edit in the characters lineup. One of the hardest things I ever did was I have these 3 books out. They're called the McKnight, Dare, and Perth series. And the character, the main character, Charlotte, she can see dead people, like she's a clairvoyant, but she can only see people who are murdered. So if she doesn't see all dead people, she only can connect with people who have passed badly. So the first book was about her and one guy, the detective. The second book was about her and her ex-boyfriend. And the third book was an arc between all of them. It was a menage by the end of the 3 books, but each book was a standalone story, and it was very hard that was very much of a challenge because I had to go back and constantly edit what I was writing in the second book or third book, going back to the first book. So that was, I don't know why I do this to myself. I throw out these challenges to myself, and I'm like, oh, I could do them. And then they're so hard to do. But that was an interesting way to write a series of books, was by writing basically 3 of them at one time and then changing the characters' backstories as I went and was, writing it.
Okay, that would be a challenge. I mean, I'm struggling with the series that I'm working on right now, and it's so it's do you have any advice for someone who's maybe looking at starting to write or looking at getting something that they've written published and they don't know where to turn or they don't know where to start? So would you have any advice for them?
Well, like I said earlier, if you want to be a good writer, then you have to read. So it's constantly reading. You're constantly learning how to write. Second thing is, don't be afraid to show your work, to find a critique partner, like a beta reader or somebody who you trust that can give it to you honest. I would never send one of my books to my mom and say, hey, Mom, how does this sound? Because she's going to say, oh, I love it, because she loves me. And she's like, I want to support everything you do. When people criticize you or critique your work, they're not going after you. They're going after the story. So don't be offended when somebody says, well, this is not working, or I don't understand what this means, because it's not you. It's from a reader's perspective. As you write your own stories, you get so much into your head that these stories, you know your characters backward and forward. You're not going to see the broader picture of, does this make sense? Or is this out of place? Or does this match what do you envision when a reader sees it? My son is 13 and he's a storyteller too. And he'll be like, he constantly tells me his stories and his ideas. And I'll be like, well, why does this happen? You have to have an organic reason why this happens. And he'll be like, I don't know, it just does. And so he's still young, so he's still learning, but it's those little tiny critiques or those little tiny questions. Don't take them to heart. Take those critiques and you learn from it, and you learn how to be a better writer. The first book that I ever wrote, my editor, oh my God, when I got it back, there was so many, they highlight words that are repetitive. And I was constantly writing I was writing in a passive voice. Learn how to write passive versus action voice. Instead of like was bringing, you brought, just a different way to phrase it, but not in a passive way. And those are my 3 kind of guidelines. Oh, and last thing, listen to your characters. Your instinct, how you write, is not wrong. And if your characters are saying, I don't want to go down hallway A, I want to go down hallway B, there's a reason why your characters want to go down hallway B. Kind of take that story and kind of run with it. So those would be my 3 biggest things for new writers is, just be honest, be true, and, listen to and read and listen to people around you.
Good advice. Good advice. Do you have a newsletter? I know with your schedule it might be a bit of a stretch, but
I do not. I don't know how. That's one thing I never really kind of thought, oh, I should do that. I know lots of authors that they send out. I mean, I get them in my email box. I don't really read them. I know that I should, but I don't. So I don't really do newsletters. If you want to find me, I'm very easy to find. I love hearing from people. You can always, send me a message through Facebook or Twitter or drop me a line. I'm always happy to hear from readers. I love, people that I love feedback. So if there's something I wrote and you're like, this really sucked, it sucked because of this reason, I will take that to heart. I would be like, oh, what did I do that was really so bad? And then I can like, okay. One of the things readers, when I first started writing, readers were like, oh, I hate this Insta love. And I'm like, right, you're right. Insta love is not a good, it's not a good plot device, unless you're, I guess, writing shifter stories. To me, so every time I write a story, if it has to be, sometimes you have to write within a guideline. Like if you're writing an anthology story and it has to be 20,000 words or less, you only have a set parameter of having two people fall in love.
Yeah.
But and it's really hard. So I try not to do the insta love. Maybe I can write a whole story and not use the word love at all. But you know that these two characters are going to stay together and grow because of the circumstances they've been thrust in. So yeah.
Do you find it to be challenging to write the romantic scenes? I know some do.
I hate it. I'm not very good at it. But I love the connections that my characters make. It's not my worst scenes or the sex scenes. I hate writing those. But I love the bonding that two characters will put together, or three characters, whatever I'm happen to be writing. It's them bonding together and forming this relationship that's actually maybe stronger than just sex or the romantic part. It's something deeper, and that's what I like writing. I like writing about the bond between two people or three people, whichever, whatever I'm writing.
I agree. I think that's the whole romance genre is not. I mean, I think it's more of more of an intimacy thing as opposed to just a titillating thing. In my mind, anyways. So, like I said, I have to finish your book, and I am so looking forward to finishing it. Okay. Well, thank you so very much, Beth. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule today. I know today was your day off. So, is there any final thoughts, any final words that you would have for any of our listeners?
No, I just really appreciate you sticking with me for the interview, because we've been trying to do this for a while now. It's funny. I don't know if readers are actually aware of that, but it's funny. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and I actually really thank you for reading my story. I am so humbled that people actually read my stories. These are characters in my head that when I was growing up, I'm like, all I want to do is write stories. That's all I wanted to do. And whenever somebody approaches me, or they talk to me, or they tell me, oh, I love this part, or I love that story, I love that character, that to me, I mean, that is humbling and just beyond words that I can say how much I'm thankful to my readers, for people who may pick up my book, or if you really like a book, make sure you leave a review on it. And those those make my day. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you to all my readers.
Well, thank you so very much, Beth. I am really looking forward to finishing this particular one, and I will have to look up your other books as well. So I will put Beth's Facebook, etc., into the description box as well for anyone who'd like to get in touch with her. And thank you so very much for joining us.